All right, welcome back to our daily read aloud. Who was Harriet Tubman? Yesterday, we read several chapters about her as a young child and as she grew up into a woman and got married. So what were some of the takeaways from her childhood? Eric?
Um, she, her family, was separated.
Okay, her family was all separated, and she was rented out as a slave to other slave owners to do work that was really hard for her at a young age. Remember when she was 6, she had to watch that baby, and if the baby cried and woke up the baby's mom, she got in trouble. So she had really hard jobs to do. Angie?
She got married, and if she tried to escape, Dylan wouldn't go with her, and he would tell the and I think that's a bad husband. Can't they just break up?
Yeah, so she was married to John Tubman. That's where her last name Tubman came from. And they were married, but like we all kind of decided yesterday, it didn't seem like he was very loving because he was not a slave anymore. He was a free man. She was a slave, and he said, if you run away and escape to get your freedom, I will tell the master. So, you're right, not a very good husband. Emma?
She helped someone escape when they were about to get.
Yes. So that kind of made her seem like a big deal. Everyone was really proud of her, really respected her, and she would not help the slave owner capture the runaway slave. Hayden?
She is now getting respect because she got hurt.
Well, she got hurt from that, and she was really tough and showed that she would not do the wrong thing just because the master told her. So people respected her for that. Chloe? Okay, that's where we ended, right? She met a white woman who was a Quaker. We know that Quakers were very peaceful. They did not agree with slavery. They wanted it to end. So anytime she could talk to this woman in the wagon when no one would see her, she'd talk to her. And she started to tell Harriet that she could help her. Josiah?
Was her husband a slave?
He was a free man. So he had been a slave at one point. When his master passed, he freed his slaves. So some masters did do that. So he was free, and she was not. Emma?
He's going to escape. She was going to escape with her brothers, but the brothers were making too much noise.
Yeah, they made a lot of noise. They got kind of scared. They decided, we better not do this. So they turned back. She went back with them. But she realized if I don't leave, I'll be on a chain gang. That's when they chain you together and you have to walk further south to your new home. And she didn't think she'd make it because she has these dizzy spells where she'd fall asleep from her head injury. All right. So I'll reread where we ended. She did pack up her stuff. She's leaving by herself. No one's going with her. She's not telling her husband because he's going to tell on her. And her brothers aren't going. So she said packing was easy. She put a little salt pork. Any meat you ate back then, you had to have a lot of salt in it so it wouldn't go bad. And a cornbread and a bandana. She took the quilt she had made. She didn't dare take more. Harriet slipped out of the house. Finally, she was on her way to freedom, on her way north. Harriet was going to make her dream come true. Chapter 4, Free at Last. Harriet walked through the dark woods. She moved without making a sound. Ben had taught her well. That was her dad. Ben also told her that bloodhounds, which is a type of dog that can smell your trail, could not follow a scent through water, so she waded through streams whenever she could. Finally, she came to a house of the Quaker woman. The Quaker woman let her in, but she told Harriet it was not safe for her to stay. Harriet would have to leave that night. The Quaker woman told her what to do next. Harriet was grateful. She wanted to thank the woman. But how? What would you do to thank that woman? You don't have much. Abby? Chloe? Well, you know more of the story, so don't give us any spoilers.
Can I have everyone participating in the talent show? All of my helpers that are working backstage in the talent.
Angie?
What was the question?
She wanted to thank that woman that helped her do the first part of her escape. So what do you think you could do?
Give her my quilt.
That's what she did. And this part always makes me so sad. She gave her her quilt. And that was really the only nice thing she owned, right? That was it, that quilt she had made. So Harriet gave the wedding quilt to her and said goodbye. Harriet had a long trip ahead of her. First, she followed the Choptank River in Maryland. When it got light, she hid. When it was dark, she started moving again. The river was 40 miles long, and it was only the start of her trip. Slowly, Harriet kept going. When the river ended, she followed a road to Camden, Delaware. She looked for a white house with green shutters. The Quaker woman had told her to do this. The woman in the white house was named Eliza Hunn. She let Harriet stay with her for 3 days. She gave her new clothes and food for the trip. Then Harriet set out again. Harriet had become a traveler on the Underground Railroad. The Underground Railroad had no tracks or cars, but it had a series of stops, homes or stores of Quakers and abolitionists, where runaway slaves could find shelter. The Underground Railroad had its own special code word to trick the white slave owners. All right. Sorry, everyone at home, we got stuck here. The Underground Railroad had no tracks or cars, but it had a series of stops, homes or stores of Quakers and abolitionists, where runaway slaves could find shelter. The Underground Railroad had its own special code words to trick the white slave owners. Escaping slaves might be called bundles, parcels, or packages. 1 bale of cotton might mean 1 slave. 2 small bales might mean that the escaping slaves were children. All right, were they using these words to be mean? Or why were they using these codes? Because it doesn't sound very nice to call people bundles or packages. Abby?
So like the white people wouldn't know it was the slaves.
Yeah, they had to talk in secret codes or else they would know what was going on. Slave hunters were everywhere. They got rewards for bringing back runaway slaves. Harriet knew her master would be looking for her. She used her bandana to cover her scar. She traveled at night. Sometimes she dressed as a man or as a fancy lady with a veil. In these clothes, she was safer. Finally, she reached Pennsylvania, and Pennsylvania was a free state. Madeline?
Wait, I think in some pictures that of people putting in her, I think they show like this brown woman wearing a bandana. Is that like talking about what just happened?
Yep. Now Harriet was a free woman. Later, Harriet said how she felt. I looked at my hands to see if I was the same person now that I was free. There was such a glory over everything. The sun came like gold through the trees and over the fields, and I felt like I was in heaven. But freedom was not easy. Years later, Harriet said, I feel free, but there was no one to welcome me to the land of freedom. I was a stranger in a strange land. It was true. Her home, her family, and her friends were back in Maryland. One day, she would go back to get them. Harriet took a job cooking and cleaning in a Philadelphia hotel. She did not like the work, but compared to being a slave, it was easy. All the money she earned was hers. And if she truly hated her job, she could leave it. No one could force her to stay. All right. Now this is a little sidebar about Vigilance Committees. As more slaves escaped from the South, Vigilance Committees sprang up in the larger towns and cities of the North, like New York, Philadelphia, and Boston. These committees, like the one William Still worked for, raised money to help the runaways. They gave food, shelter, and money to the escaped slaves, who often arrived with torn, filthy clothes, bare feet, and nowhere to go. The members of the Vigilance Committees also helped the runaways settle into communities by giving them letters of recommendation and finding jobs for them. So when you guys grow up and get jobs, you'll sometimes have to give a letter of recommendation, which that'll be someone else in your life that says they're a good worker and they will vouch for you. They will write a nice letter for your boss that you're applying for, and it'll tell them what a good person you are. So you can imagine if you were a runaway slave, you wouldn't know anybody that could write you a recommendation. So this helped them all get jobs. After work, Harriet began to visit the offices of the Philadelphia Vigilance Committee. This was a group of people who helped runaway slaves. The men and women there sometimes had news of Harriet's family back home. Harriet learned that her sister Mary and Mary's family were going to be sold. Harriet decided she had to go back to Maryland. Her sister's family needed her. She would bring them north. William Still was the secretary of the Vigilance Committee, and he was her friend. He warned her not to go. It was too dangerous, but she wouldn't listen. A clever plan was devised. Harriet's Quaker friends got the plan to John Boley. He was married to Harriet's sister Mary. John was a free man, although his wife and children were slaves. By the time John got the plan, his family had already been taken to the slave auction, but they had not yet been sold. It was lunchtime, and the auctioneer was taking a break. He would sell the rest of the slaves after he had eaten. Right then, John Boley walked to the slave pen. In his hand, he held a large white envelope with a message inside. He handed it to a guard watching the slaves. The message said that Mary's master already had a buyer for her and the children. John was to take Mary and their children to the inn where the auctioneer was having lunch. The message was a trick. It was not from Mary's master, but the guard did not suspect a thing. John took Mary and the children. Quickly, they went down the street, but they did not go to the inn to find the auctioneer. They were escaping in the middle of the day. They tried to walk calmly so as to not attract attention. Finally, after what seemed like a long walk, they came to a house with a picket fence. Inside was a Quaker man. He was the one who had written the message. The Quaker took the family up to his attic. Night came. The family crept out and into a wagon. The Quaker man covered them with blankets and drove them to a river. A fishing boat filled with blankets and food was waiting for them. John sailed the boat up the Chesapeake River in Maryland. He was told to sail toward Baltimore. He had to look for 2 lights, one blue and one yellow. John sailed all night long. As morning came, he worried. How would he see the lights in the daytime? But he did, and he guided the boat to them. A white woman was on the shore, sitting in a wagon. "Who are you?" she asked. "A friend with friends," John answered, for this was the code phrase he'd been told to say. The woman greeted him warmly and helped the family into her wagon. She covered them with blankets and bags of onions and potatoes. Next, she drove them to a stable where they got out of the wagon and waited until dark. Then she helped them back into the wagon and drove them to a brick house in Maryland. The white woman knocked on the door and they all went inside. There was Harriet, waiting for them. She had arranged for the boats and for the wagons. Now, she was ready to lead them north. John and Mary saw that Harriet had a pistol. She had bought it with the money she'd earned. Armed with a gun and her knowledge of the swamps, Harriet led her sister's family from station to station on the Underground Railroad. They hid during the day and traveled at night. At times they walked. At other times they went by boat or wagon. Finally, they arrived safely in Philadelphia. It was the first time Harriet had been a conductor on the Underground Railroad, but it was certainly not the last. Chapter 5, The Conductor. Harriet planned to go south again. She had many relatives who needed her help. But the trip was even more dangerous after 1850. That was because the fugitive slave law had been passed. Now, runaway slaves who had reached free states had to be sent back to their masters. And if people did not turn in runaways, they could be fined or put in jail. Runaway slaves could be shot, whipped, or sold to the deep south, where they would probably die anyway. If Harriet wanted to make sure her parcels, which remember is a code word for the people, reached safety and freedom, she would have to take them across the U.S. border to Canada. There was no slavery in Canada. But the closest towns in Canada were much farther north than Philadelphia or New York. The trip would be longer. There would be greater risk of discovery. Slave hunters were on the lookout. Rewards were offered for turning in slaves, and the slave hunters wanted to collect them. Still, Harriet was determined to make the trip. Harriet went back to Maryland in 1851. She led one of her brothers and 2 other men to freedom. So one of those brothers ended up leaving with her after all. She just had to go all the way back and get him. Up north, she took a job at another hotel. She worked hard and saved her money. She was going south again. This time, she would bring her husband, John Tubman, with her. She traveled to the plantation where she used to work. She was wearing a man's suit. Why do you think she's disguising herself as a man? Quentin?
Because then he won't, or like, anybody else that sees her, they won't suspect that she's actually Harriet Tubman.
Right, it's a disguise. No, is that what you're going to say?
Kind of not.
You can add to it.
I was gonna say that he might put on a man's jacket to make her husband think he's a man, trying to let him escape, and then she'll tell him I'm Harriet.
Okay, so she doesn't want anybody to know who she is, maybe. Angie?
I have a feeling that John already told the master, and when Harriet comes back to get him, he'll just be fine and they'll walk out, and then the master will see them and then maybe he'll kill them.
Okay. Emma?
Why? Why is she going to get him? He wasn't really good to her.
I don't know. That's what I wonder too. I think if I were her, there's no way I would have done that. But she must have really loved him. Madeline?
It's maybe because, like, some people think that love is stronger than hate.
Yeah. So I don't know. Maybe they were writing letters to each other. I don't know. But yeah, you're right. It is very confusing to think why she would do that. All right. So she traveled to the plantation where she used to work. She was wearing a man's suit. A man's hat hid her scar. But when she reached John's cabin, she had a surprise. John had another wife now. He wouldn't go with her. Harriet quickly left. She gathered another group of slaves together. They wanted to be free, so she led them north. Before, there had always been family members in her group, along with other slaves. But after this, she began taking groups of people she didn't know. Harriet set up a routine. In the winter, she rented a house in St. Catharines, Canada. Other former slaves lived with her. They chopped wood to earn money. In spring and summer, she went to Cape May, New Jersey, or Philadelphia. There, she earned money working in hotels. Twice a year, in the spring and the fall, she went south. Each time she did, she brought back more slaves to Canada. Sometimes she taught other slaves how to escape on their own. She drew maps in the dirt, described the landmarks, and told them where to get help. By now, Harriet had lots of experience. While she never traveled the same route twice, she grew familiar with the swamps, rivers, and potato holes along the way. She knew all the Quaker meeting houses where passengers could find shelter. She used many trips to help runaways avoid slave hunters. Or many tricks, sorry. Men dressed like women. Women dressed like men. Slaves escaped on a Saturday night. Sunday was not a work day. The slaves wouldn't be missed until Monday. Slave owners wouldn't be able to organize their search parties or print their wanted posters until Monday. By then, Harriet and the other passengers would be long gone. People began to talk about Harriet. They made up stories about her. She could see in the dark, sniff danger in the wind, carry a grown man for miles. All right, what does this kind of sound like? Josiah?
100% hyperbole, but it sounds like a tall tale now.
Yeah, so you can kind of see how tall tales kind of come to be. Someone that does do amazing things, you can kind of make the stories bigger than they actually are. So while none of that was true, people still told the stories. Slave owners knew about Harriet too. They put up posters promising big rewards for her capture. At one point, there was $40,000 in rewards being offered. And this was back in the 1850s, which was a lot of money. Probably millions and millions today. Josiah?
Like, I've written in one time in NWEA, in reading, they said they were talking about, they had a question about this story, and the story was about a girl who wanted to get a doll, and it was like 2 cents, and they couldn't afford it.
Mm-hmm. All right, I'm going to read a couple more pages, and we'll stop for the day. Harriet learned about the posters, which described her age, height, and scar. The poster said she couldn't read or write. Once in a train station, Harriet heard 2 men talking about her. They were trying to decide if she was the woman in the poster. Harriet was carrying a book. She opened it and pretended to read. The men decided that she was not the woman on the poster. Harriet had tricked them, but barely. She was lucky she had not been holding the book upside down. Then Harriet heard that her father was in trouble with his master. Harriet knew what she had to do. She would go back and get her parents. But Ben and old Rip were not like her other passengers. They were old and frail. They could not walk all night or wade through rivers. She would have to find them another way. Harriet returned to the plantation in Maryland in 1857. She found an old horse named Dolly May. Luring the horse to the woods, Harriet tied her to a tree. Then she made a crude wagon from old carriage wheels, an axle, some boards, and some rope. So she built herself a wagon in the woods, which is impressive. Now she was ready to get her parents. They could ride to Canada. And that is where we have to stop today.
No.
See you soon.